Anyway, God has really blessed this nation greatly. I mean, He's given this nation so many blessings. And these actually come down from the blessings that God gave to Israel, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And from the very beginning of the foundation of this country, it was based on Christian principles. As a nation, many of the early immigrants came to this country and they suffered great persecution in the old world for religious beliefs, and they came across this ocean. Many people died as they came across. They struggled. They endured great discomfort and even death to be able to come across to this country, many of them for religious reasons. And so this nation was built upon the beliefs, Christian beliefs, and upon the Bible. And these people who came here found comfort in that, and strength and direction, just like we heard this morning or earlier. They found direction in that, and they used that to guide the development of this nation. And these Christian principles that this country is built on, or was built on, were passed down through the generations from mother and father to their children. And God created that family that was all part of this process of bringing these lessons from one generation to another one. And these families are based on the Christian belief that this nation was founded on. You know, when we talk about a family, there are very few words that evoke the emotions that when you think of family. You know, if you come from a good, functional family, you know, the memories that you have, the wonderful thoughts, the warm feelings that you have. If you come from a functional family in your background, boy, count it as a blessing, because unfortunately that isn't the case in so many families today. But you know, there's no better environment to raise a family or to raise a child than within a family, to grow a child than within a family. And as I said, unfortunately, many families in this world aren't that way. You know, there's not one of the things that Satan really honestly hates is the family, because he hates the idea that God's going to have a family and that He's generating new children into that family. And he realizes that's one way that he can try to cloud and cause issues within, he thinks, God's plan, is by destroying the family. And he loves to destroy that. You know, I read recently an article about, it came from an activist from the 1960s. And he was an activist, and one of the things that he wanted to do was disrupt this society so they could make it more equal. They could, you know, especially as far as male-female, because they felt the family was holding back equality within the nation. And he said within his group that the thing that they actually looked at and decided they needed to target was the family. They felt if they could destroy the family, then you could have equality. What would rise up out of that would be equality within the nation. Of course, we haven't seen that happen. Destroying the family doesn't do that. And that activist actually said that they believed a much fairer and productive society would eventually develop without the restraints of a traditional family. That was their thought at that time. And we can see the result of that, the upheaval, the higher divorce rates, the disruption of the family and children and their relationships with parents, and even the extended family. And if you actually look at the evidence out there and the research out there, it consistently shows that the traditional family structure is the perfect environment to raise and develop children, to raise them to successful and productive life, a good family. There are many dysfunctional ones, but if you have a good environment with a family, that's the best place to raise children to be successful and productive. And then from that, you have communities that are raised that are successful and productive. And from that, strong communities, you get a strong nation. You know, Confucius said the strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home. And John Paul II said, as the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. And Tony Blair, he was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007. He made the following statement while he was Prime Minister. He said, "We will respect family life. We will develop it and encourage it in any way we can. For strong families are the foundation of strong communities." And God knew what he was doing. From the very beginning, he built this family structure. He built the family structure of the husband and wife and then the children that they would bear, going way back to the beginning of Genesis. In Genesis 2:24, when God created Adam and Eve and he blessed their union as husband and wife. And even before that, his first directive to Adam and Eve in Genesis 1:28, he tells them really to build a family. And he says, then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it." They were supposed to have a family. And God knew at the very core of that, very core of a vibrant and strong society, was this relationship between the husband and the wife. So today I'd like to take a look at one of the basic principles of a strong family. But it even goes beyond that. And that principle is actually so important that God made it one of his 10 commandments. He wrote it down as one of the 10 commandments because this principle is so important. Let's go ahead and turn back to Deuteronomy 5, to the commandments that God set forth to Israel. He wrote them down here. They were in effect long before this. But in Deuteronomy 5, we'll actually begin in verse 7. We'll actually begin with the very beginning of the commandments, or at the beginning of the commandments, because it builds the foundation for the 5th commandment. The first commandment, it says in verse 7, Deuteronomy 5, "You shall have no other gods before me." Now this teaches that there is one God, only one God, only one true God, and that he is one. Verse 8, the second commandment, it says, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is in earth beneath." You know, that teaches us that God is a spiritual God, and you can only worship him as a spiritual being. You can't represent him as a physical being, but as a spiritual being, and we must worship him spiritually. The third commandment in verse 11 says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." That teaches us that God's name and what it represents, we need to take that as a holy thing. We can't take it lightly. We've got to respect that and respect who he is. The fourth commandment, verse 12, says, "Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you." That teaches that we need to worship God. We need to set aside time that he says we're supposed to set aside, the Sabbath, to worship and honor him. Those first 4 commandments, they show us how we're supposed to worship and honor God. It lays the foundation for the next 6 commandments, because our priority is to worship, to love, and to honor God. And that builds the foundation for the next part of these. Let's go ahead and continue on to verse 16. The 5th commandment, which is going to be the subject of my sermon today. Verse 16, "Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long, and that you may be well with you. It may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you." You know, the first 4 commandments, as I said, teach us honor and love towards God. This one, from that foundation, teaches us honor and love towards our parents, towards our mother and our father. The beginning of love towards our fellow humans actually is the beginning of our love towards God first, and then it tells us here specifically that we need to honor father and mother. So let's actually go through this commandment a little bit more closely and in detail. Let's go back to verse 16. Honor your father and your mother. You know, it's interesting here, it doesn't tell us to just honor our father, or it doesn't tell us to just honor our mother. It says to honor both of them. We're supposed to honor both father and mother. You know, and through most history, society's been male-oriented. Even Israel was male-oriented in many ways. But this commandment tells us that, hey, you're supposed to honor both of them. You're supposed to both be shown honor. You know, and unless you think, well, okay, it says father first, mother second, that the father's supposed to be honored first and the mother second, well, that's not the case. Because if we turn to Leviticus 19, we'll see a scripture that has this reversed. Leviticus 19, verse 2. We'll actually break into the middle of that. But we read here, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Verse 3, every one of you shall revere or honor his mother and his father. Mother's mentioned before the father here, so it indicates to us that they both need to receive equal honor. You know, the New Interpreter's Bible tells us that in the fifth commandment, when we have that word honor, it comes from the Hebrew word kaved. And it actually has kind of a meaning of heaviness or weightiness. That this is a weighty affair. This is something that we shouldn't take lightly. And it's something that may, to some extent, kind of be a little bit of a burden. And the underlying Hebrew word, the root of this, also indicates heaviness. It's a weighty matter to do it. And the Hebrew word that's translated here as honor, in the other places in the Bible is translated as reverence, honorable, glory, make glorious, glorify, very great, promote, be rich. Those are other meanings of the root word to this. So we can see that word honor has a meaning that we shouldn't take lightly. And when you think of honor in the English language, it typically means to give high esteem to, or to think highly of, to regard highly, to give special recognition to, or to give respect and credit to. So we can put those phrases, any of those phrases, into this commandment. We're supposed to show respect to our mother and our father. Have high esteem for them. High regard for them. And if you look at this commandment, honor your father and your mother, there's no indication there's an age range on this. We don't say something here that says, oh, when you're young, honor your mother and father. When you're old, honor your mother and father. When you're teenagers, honor your mother and father. It doesn't indicate anything there. We're supposed to honor our mother and father. Our grandparents, our parents. Should we have honor to them? And to be honest, even if our parents aren't alive or our grandparents aren't alive, we should still honor their memory. We should still give them honor. Back in Deuteronomy 5, verse 16, let's continue. Deuteronomy 5:16. It says, as the Lord your God has commanded you, that your days may be long, and that it may be well with you in the land which the Lord your God has given you. You know, kind of the interesting thing about the fifth commandment is that it gives us a reason and a blessing. It gives us a reason and a blessing. Many of the other 10 commandments don't do this. They just say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. But this one actually gives us a reason and a blessing to it. So it tells us not only why we should keep it, but what the blessing will be. So God explains the why. He says that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God has given you, and that it might be well with you. So it's telling us, okay, a blessing and a reason that it may be long, that we may live long, and that it may be well with us. Those are reasons and blessings. In other words, keep this commandment so you may have a long life, and that it may be well with you. But in the reverse side, if you keep this commandment, your life will normally be longer and will be happier. Now that's not going to happen to everyone. But we know as a general thing, it typically will. God will reward us if we follow His commandments. And another thing about, as we read that, it said that in the land, in other words, it's actually saying that not only as a people will you have safety and peace and a long life, but as a nation, these blessings will come to it. So, if we keep as a nation this commandment, the fifth commandment, the nation will prosper and be in peace. You know, if you build a society built on God's laws in which children honor their parents, our society will most likely last longer and be more peaceful. You know, if children respect their parents, and if we respect our elders, and if there's respect within the society, that helps stability within the society. You know, and we've got problems in our society now, many of which are reflected by a lack of respect. The corruption, the drug problems, the divorce rates, various other things. And there are many reasons for these things, but one of those can be just our respect for our parents and our family as a unit. You know, I've got something I read recently. I'll read to you. Just try to figure out the time period this was written. It says, an angry father asks his teenage son, "Where did you go?" The boy, trying to sneak home late at night, answers, "Nowhere." "Grow up," the father chides him. "Stop hanging around the public squares and wandering up and down the street. Go to school. Night and day you torture me. Night and day you waste your time having fun." You know, that could easily be something that a father said to his son last night. But this was actually written down 4,000 years ago on a clay tablet by a Sumerian father. That long ago. So this is something that happens in normal life. It's our society repeats itself. And this is an issue that isn't just from our society, our time now, but throughout all history. Turn with me to Proverbs 30. Proverbs 30, verse 11. Proverbs 30:11. Because we'll read here what happens when there's a breakdown of honor and respect within a society. Proverbs 30, verse 11. We'll read through verse 14. There is a generation that curses its father and does not bless its mother. Lack of honor towards parents. Verse 12. There is a generation that is pure in its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness. And this word filthiness is actually talking about, it's a Hebrew word that actually talks about basically a little baby's diaper, dirty diaper. That's what it's talking about there. They're like babies' dirty diapers. Verse 13. There's a generation, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are lifted up. There's a generation whose teeth are like swords, and whose fangs are like knives, to devour the poor from off the earth, and the needy from among men. This is what God says happens to a society when there's a breakdown of honor towards father and mother. Honor towards those that we should give honor to. Turn with me to Proverbs 3. Just back a little bit. Proverbs 3, and we'll see some of the benefits that God tells us from honoring father and mother. Proverbs 3 verses 1 and 2. My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. Now here's a father saying, or, it's a father, but a mother could say this too. Honor me, don't forget my law. And this is the benefit from it. Long life, peace. That's exactly what the fifth commandment tells us too. Long life and peace. We read of that earlier. Those are some of the benefits of honoring a father and mother. Now again, this doesn't guarantee, keeping the fifth commandment doesn't guarantee that we'll have long life. And it doesn't guarantee that we will have peace. But as a whole, as a norm, typically those things will be the result of keeping that commandment. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples of some examples in the Bible of honoring parents. We'll just take a look at a few. If you think back, think of Ruth. Remember what she did? She left her society, forsook it to go with her mother-in-law, to live in the land of Israel with Naomi. She honored her mother-in-law. And Solomon, there's an interesting story about Solomon. One day his mother Bathsheba came to him and had some requests. And what he did is, he actually he bowed before her and said, hey, bring me a throne so she can sit on it. He was showing honor to her. Let's turn to John 19. Let's look at how Christ honored his mother. John 19. This takes place during his crucifixion as he's hanging from the cross. We can see how Jesus Christ honored his mother as one of his last responsibilities on this earth. He gave honor to his mother. Made sure she was going to be taken care of after he was gone. John 19, beginning in verse 25. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. 26. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved, that is John, standing by, he said to his mother, Woman, behold your son. Verse 27. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that hour that disciple took her to his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished. All things were now accomplished. This was something that he needed to do before he died. Show honor to his mother and take care of her. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Verse 29, now a vessel full of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge and sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. Verse 30, so when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished, and bowed his head. He gave up his spirit. Again, at the very end of his life, he looked to his mother with honor and took care of him. Took care of her. Even just prior to his last breath. He wanted to make sure he honored her. And Jesus at this time was in his 30s. He shows that it was still time. Even in his 30s, we should honor our parents. There isn't an age limit to keeping that fifth commandment. And it even shows that in the midst of great physical and emotional pain and distress, he still showed honor to his mother. So let's look at now at some ways that we can honor our parents. Some ways we can honor our parents. So how do you honor parents? Let me give you some ways. Whether your parents are 30 years old or 90 years old, we can honor them. First is to greet them publicly and show honor. Greet them publicly and show honor. I mentioned to you King Solomon and his mother. When she came to him with this request, he greeted her with honor. He bowed, the king bowed before her, and then gave her a seat of high regard, showing publicly that he honored his mother. And we need to greet and respect our parents too. We don't have to bow before them. That's not a common thing now. But we need to show honor to them as we meet them. You know, I enjoy watching families greet each other. You know, it's always a fun thing to do. In church, I enjoy it. You know, it's kind of fun sometimes in airports. You know, it used to be more fun back when people could meet them at the gate. But, you know, you can still see that sometimes as you're standing out waiting for people to pick up other people, and you see people greeting each other and children greeting their parents and the like. It's a real neat thing to see. But, you know, I had an event happen to me when I was 14 or 15 years old. You know, it was in the midst of the whole upheaval of the 60s and 70s. This would have been around 1972, I would imagine. And really, honor to parents and even to the country was at a low at that time. And this incident happened to me that really had a great impression on me. I lived in Orlando, Florida at the time, and the church was having this big event. We actually had Jesse Owens. I don't know how many of you know Jesse Owens, but he actually came and spoke to us. And there's a family that I met there. It was a fairly large family. It's 5 or 6 children. And I met one of the kids in it that was my age, and we kind of hung around a little bit at the activity. And then he went over to greet his mom and dad and to introduce me to his mom and dad. And I come from a family where we were not very demonstrative in our feelings. And we actually, when I left for college, I shook my mom's hand. I didn't even hug her, but that was just the nature of my family. But when I went up with this friend of mine, this new friend of mine, to his family, he greeted his mom and dad with a big hug and a kiss. And I thought, well, this is really neat. You know, this is the way it should be. And then throughout the evening, as each child came, because these kids were between probably, I would say between 13 and 22, as each child greeted their parents, each one of them, no matter what the age was, greeted them with a hug and a kiss. And as I got to know them over time, that was just what they did. They showed respect to their parents by hugging and kissing them every time they met when they were away from each other. And I thought, wow, this is the way it should be. To show honor, you knew those children honored their parents. And what a fine example that was to them. So that's something we need to do, is in whatever manner we should show publicly our honor to our parents. Another way to honor them is to ask for advice and partake of their wisdom. Ask for advice and partake of their wisdom. You know, you've probably heard the following little statement from Mark Twain, but it's so good, I'll repeat it anyway. You know, Mark Twain once wrote the following: "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years." I mean, you've probably heard that, but I think in some ways many of us have been through that. You know, and in our society today, especially with all the computer stuff and ways you can gather information, we can sometimes even look less to our parents for instruction and advice in life. And we really need to be careful that we still do look to them. Proverbs 1, verse 8 through 9. Let's go ahead and turn there. Proverbs 1, 8 through 9. Because older people and parents, they have lived the life and learned many lessons. Yeah, they may not know all the technical stuff, but there's a lot that they know that just takes time. Proverbs 1, verse 8 says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they, if you obey these instructions, they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck." Following good advice from parents will help us in life. And it's like fine jewelry. Proverbs 23, verse 22. Proverbs 23, verse 22 says, "Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Also wisdom and instruction and understanding. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a wise child will delight in him. Let your father and your mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice." So we need to take advantage of the wisdom they have and honor them in that way. You know, when I was 13, I had this friend that was retired. He was probably about 67, and I was probably 13. You know, many of you from back that time remember the quote-unquote new math they had. It's often talked about. And I think I was probably said something a bit disrespectful to him about, you know, all the stuff we were learning in school and everything. It was probably a bit full of himself. And as I said, I think I said something probably disrespectful to him, and he gently corrected me. Because he said, "Hey, you know, you can run circles around me with this new math and all the new science stuff you're learning and all that stuff. But," he says, "I've got knowledge that's going to take you time and years to learn." You know, he called that common sense, but really it's wisdom. There are things that you often learn just by living. And so we need to take advantage of that. Yeah, there are things, that new understanding that we get through all the learning that's going on in the world, that might contradict what our parents may say as far as various things. But as far as common sense and wisdom that you learn through time, we need to make sure we ask for that and use it. Another way is to speak honorably with and about your parents. Speak honorably with and about your parents. And that's one way that we can speak and show honor, is privately and publicly, to make sure that we are honorable to them as we speak. We need to make sure we speak respectfully to them and show honor in how we interact with them. And that doesn't mean that we can't disagree with them. We should, if we've got different beliefs or different opinions, we should make those known, but it has to be done respectfully. We have to do these things respectfully. It doesn't come, that fifth commandment doesn't come with a little asterisk that says, you know, we only have to do this sometimes or when we agree with them. But we still need to honor them. In Proverbs 20, verse 20, you don't need to turn there. It says, "Whosoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in deep darkness." So we need to talk respectfully to our parents. 1 Timothy 5, we will turn there. 1 Timothy 5. Paul's giving instructions to Timothy here on how to interact with his church, how to interact with them, because he had people of many different ages. And Timothy was a younger man, quite possibly in his 30s, maybe in his early 40s when Paul writes this. 1 Timothy 5, verse 1. Here's Paul's again talking to Timothy about how to interact. He says, 1 Timothy 5:1, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with all purity. Honor widows who are really widows." In other words, Paul tells Timothy to treat the church like it's a family and honor people that are older and even that are your age. Honor them properly. Honor those that are older than you as a father and a mother. Speak respectfully to them. A fourth way is to have regular contact with them. Honor your parents by having regular contact with them. Now, oftentimes, we don't live close to our parents. We live far away. That's an unfortunate thing in our modern society. But we need to have, if your parents are still alive, we need to have regular contact with them. And it's made easier now with emails, phone calls, letters, Skype, FaceTime, Facebook. I think it's interesting that Paul didn't have a family of his own, but he treated his churches as family. He looked at them as family, and he wrote many letters to them, which we have some of those as epistles in our Bible now. Those are letters to his family. And even when it became difficult for him to write, he actually says in Galatians 6:11 that, "See what large letters I use as I write to you with my own hand." Even when it was getting difficult, he still continued this. And the Apostle John, he kind of indicates the same thing, that he enjoyed seeing his churches. When he says in 2 John 12, he says, "I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face, so that our joy may be complete." Visiting, he saw as a joy, both directions. It can be a great joy for us as we grow older. A fifth way that we can honor our parents is by assisting them financially as they get older. Assisting them financially as they get older. As children get to the point that they're able to provide for themselves, it actually honors their parents when they are able to take care of themselves. When they are able to be self-sufficient and provide for themselves in their household. That is honoring their parents when they do that. And then as parents get older, they may need financial assistance to be able to live. We all hope that we can live by Proverbs 13:22, which says, "A good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children." We'd all love to be able to do that, but life doesn't always happen that way. Things come up, circumstances grow, health problems, whatever. So it may not happen. But as children, we need to make sure that we honor parents by helping them. In 1 Timothy 4, which is probably on the same page, 1 Timothy 4, Paul tells Timothy about this. If a widow, and he's looking at this as a widow, if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. So God shows that as children we are supposed to take care of our parents and grandparents. And by extension, we're supposed to be taking care of widows and widowers and those that are in need. It's putting religion into practice when we do this. A sixth way we can honor parents, and there are many more than this, but is reminiscing with them. Reminiscing with them. Especially let them know what they did right. Let them know what they did right. I'm sure many of you who have children, we've grown older, at least for me, there are few things as nice as having my kids talk to me about things we did in the past and that they enjoyed and they look back at fondly. My kids do that every now and then. We'll be sitting around the table and they'll start talking about trips we've taken or things we've done in times past. And that honors my wife and I when they do that. Reminiscing is a good thing, bringing back fond memories. In 1 Thessalonians 3, you don't need to turn there, 1 Thessalonians 3:6, Timothy had just returned from the Thessalonian church and told Paul that they, the Thessalonians, always have pleasant memories of him. How wonderful that is. Showing respect to Paul by apparently telling and talking about the memories they had of him and the good times they had. And as parents, we love to hear about those pleasant memories and those good times. There's always the problem, though, What about if I can't honor my parent? Parents aren't always good parents. Not everyone has grown up in a relationship where their parents were good. Their parents might have abused them. Their parents might have neglected them. They might have been alcoholics, might have belittled them. They might have neglected you. They may never have shown you honor yourself. What do we do in those cases? How do we honor them? Again, I go back to there's no if statement in the fifth commandment. There's no if statement. We don't say honor your father and mother unless, until, or if, and then you put in whatever there is. We're told simply to honor them. Every parent deserves honor not because of what they did or didn't do. When you show honor to your parents, you show honor to God. So for those parents that were not truly honorable themselves, we should honor them as a way of showing honor to God. And doing that doesn't mean we agree with what they did or how they lived, or that we even have to, or that we accept what they did or how they raised us. But what we're doing is we're honoring God through honoring our parents. Romans 12, verse 17. Romans 12, 17. When you honor your parent who's unworthy, you are honoring God. Romans 12, verse 17 through 19. It says, repay no one evil for evil. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourself, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So there are things that we have to turn over to God. There are things we have to turn over to Him and show what honor we can. In doing so, we honor God. Again, that doesn't mean we necessarily are going to change and love them. It's not required. You don't see that any place, or that we accept anything. But it does show that we still need to honor God through honoring them. So how do we teach children to honor? How do we teach children to honor? Because honor isn't something that we just grow up with. In other words, it comes innately within us. We just, hey, you grow up, you show honor. It's something that we have to be taught. Something we have to be taught. We have to be taught to be honorable and to honor. So how do we teach our children to honor? Okay, one way is by showing honor to God. Showing honor to God. How do we honor God in front of our children? Are we showing honor to God by living His way of life? Are we showing honor to God by speaking of Him and glorifying Him in front of our children? When our children see us honor God, they learn how to honor God and others. A second way is to make sure that we as fathers and mothers are honorable. It's to make sure that we're honorable. Because when we are an example of someone who is honorable, then they can see God in a way where they can honor Him. And then they'll strive to imitate us. They'll see our actions as we are honorable. They'll see those actions and they'll imitate them. If we're honorable to other people and show our honor to other people, children will imitate that. A third way is openly honor your parents and others. We need to be honoring our parents if they're still alive, or if they're not, their memory. So we need to openly show that to our children. You know, there's a little anecdote about a family. They had a small child. And then an older parent came to live with them. And one night, while eating supper, the older father, the older father, While he was eating, he spilled some of his food. Made a mess. So the next night, the parents moved the father into the kitchen where if he made a mess, it was easy to clean up. And the parents and the small child ate in the dining room, and the father made more of a mess. And then knocked over a dish and broke it. And the parents said, okay, we can't have any more broken dishes. What I'm going to do is we'll only give him a wooden plate, so he can no longer break those beautiful dishes. A couple months later, the husband and wife go outside, and their little son is in the backyard with hammer and nails. They hear this noise of pounding. And what in the world is this? And sawing and everything. And they look out there and they say, "What? Hey, son, what are you doing?" And he says, "I'm making a trough for you when you grow old, so I'll be ready." Through watching how the parents treated their parents, his parents treated his grandparents, the son learned how to respect and honor his parents. So we need to properly show honor to our parents and to the memory of our parents and how we treat them. Another way, a fourth way to help our children understand honor, to understand honor of the mother and the father, is to honor them through how you treat each other in marriage. How you treat the husband and the wife treat each other during marriage. Do they respect each other? A child is not going to respect a mother if the father comes home and belittles her all the time. A young son and daughter is going to have a hard time respecting a father if the mother belittles the father all the time. So as husband and wife, within marriage, do we show honor to each other, the husband and wife, so our children learn that we respect each other and honor each other, and they learn by just the daily interaction of how we're supposed to respect somebody. A fifth way is by showing honor and respect to our own children. That's how we teach honor to our children, is by showing honor and respect to them. By honoring and respecting our children and making them understand that they are important to us. That's how we show them great love. That's how they learn. Another way they learn. Again, they imitate us. If we respect them, show them respect, over time they will grow in respect and how to show it. In conclusion, let's turn to one more scripture, Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3. Ephesians 6, 1 through 3 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth." Again, this fifth commandment isn't just a commandment in the Old Testament given to Israel. We see Paul repeating it here. Not only does he repeat the command, but he repeats the why, the reason why, and the blessing. That it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. That's in the New Testament given to the new Israel, the church of God, the family of God. So we can begin building if we have problems within our families, or even as we want to train our children or those around us, we can begin building that life of honor to parents. And we can claim that promise that we may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth.